Welcome to Southern Vintage Computing. My name is Alan. I have here today with me one of my most unique computers. It is a Zenith Z-120 all-in-one, a member of the very small family of Z-100 computers overall. So what is a Z-100? What could it do? What operating systems does it have? What are the specs on it? And most importantly, why would someone buy one of these in the IBM ISA bus era of computers? We're going to get into all that today. So one of the things that I like that certain vintage computer YouTubers will do, such as Adrian over at Adrian's Digital Basement or Shelby at Tech Tangents, they will take the short attention span seeking YouTube algorithm and throw it in the dumpster and take 30 minutes or an hour to compile all the research about a certain computer or peripheral or card, etc., and just explain all the history, some of the obscure little facts about things. I love that sort of thing, and I think it's a great thing to do for preserving the history of these old vintage products. So that's what I'm going to do today in this video. We're going to talk about all the information that can be had that I can compile in a nice orderly video. This is going to be a series deep diving into this computer and family of computers that it comes from. This first video is going to be information only. The next video after this one is going to be us tearing this down, cleaning this up, putting it all back together. This particular machine right here that I brought into my collection about 2 years ago in 2022 as of recording this video, this computer, I know for a fact, has not been plugged in and run since the 1980s. So it has been almost 40 years that this computer has not run. I am not going to risk just plugging it in and flipping the switch and seeing what happens. We're not going to do that. I know these things were built very ruggedly. I'm not going to tempt fate with it. So that second video is going to be us doing a teardown and a cleanup and put back together. The third video, we're going to be very slowly but surely testing the power supply, putting a slight load on it, seeing what that does, making sure our voltages are correct. Then we're going to start with the motherboard, and then we're going to take the floppy card controller, then finish off with the MFM drive controller, and do a full test in that third video. Probably the fourth video is going to be testing out the various operating systems that were available for this computer, the software that could have run on it, and we're going to be doing that. So this is going to be quite the series. One of the things that I noticed after I got this computer is, it's like so many of us in the vintage computing family, what we do is, you get a new computer, you go buy yourself your first Apple II GS, or, you go out and get yourself a K Pro 2, or you get yourself your first IBM 5150 or 5160. The first thing you do is you go on YouTube, you type in whatever I've just bought, and you want to see a nice 15-20 minute video of someone showing you some of the internals of the computer, explaining some of the specs with it, showing you the software it could use, and testing some of the stuff out, right? For the Zenith Z-100 family, such videos do not exist. I have looked high and low for quite a while in my research on this family of computers, these Z-100 computers. There are a precious handful of websites that go into some depth the information and have some software images backups of what these things could do and run. However, there are only a couple. I can count on one hand the number of videos on YouTube as of me filming this right now of the Zenith Z-100 family. It includes the Zenith Z-110s and the Zenith Z-120s. There are no information videos. There are a handful where somebody just plugs it in, turns it on. Maybe there's one or two videos of some software actually running. That's about it. And I want to make a series of videos for when people hit that YouTube, so let's say some kid, 20 years old, cleaning out his grandpa's attic, finds one of these things. The first thing he's going to do is, what is this? Go on YouTube. I want my videos to be, at least for now, the definitive series of videos on this computer family. So that's what we're going to do today. So what is the Zenith Z-100 family of computers? I'm going to first tell you what it's not. It is not an IBM PC clone compatible, okay? Now, IBM had released its PC 5150 in 1981 with its new ISA bus system, which rapidly became the industry standard from that point forward by the mid-80s. But this computer, this family of computers, is based on the older and at the time more well-established S-100 bus system. Eventually, the S-100 bus system had been codified into the IEEE 696 standard, which lasted until around 1994, if memory serves correctly. The S-100 bus system was introduced around 1974 with the introduction of the Altair 8800 and became rapidly very popular with especially homebrew computers, the microcomputing of that era, the late 70s. In the late 70s, one of the more popular groups producing S-100 computers was Heathkit. Heathkit was subsequently bought by Zenith in 1979 when Zenith wanted to get into the microcomputing arena, and they produced some rather, let's say, refined professional computers on that S-100 bus system. So they offered a couple of different models of these computers. One was the Zenith Z-110 low profile models where you had the disk drives and keyboard as one component, and then you would have a separate detachable monitor. If you wanted to color monitor, you'd have to get that one in order to get the color. This one here is an all-in-one, a Z-120 model. Everything is all included in one package. These things weigh about 68 pounds, if memory serves. It is quite heavy, everything in there. Early on, when these came out in 1982, your options were these Shugart style disk drives only, and then starting, if I remember the advertising correctly, around early 1983, they started producing them with the optional hard disk, which at the time they called the Winchester. It was a kind of a nickname of hard disks back in the day. This particular machine here has got a Miniscribe 2012, if I remember the model correctly, hard disk in it, and I have no idea whether it works or not. Like I said before, this computer has not been turned on since the 80s. I don't know if it still works, what data might have been on it. We will hopefully find out. But yes, this thing had the 5.25 and 10 megabyte hard drive option. Internally, these computers are very interesting in that they are dual processor machines. It came with an 8-bit Intel 8085, which they said was mainly for your CPM work. And then they have also an Intel 8088, which they advertise as its 16-bit capable processor. Now, there's a huge asterisk on that. Of course, the 8088 is a sister processor to an 8086. The 8086 was technically a 16-bit processor. The 8088 is a 16-bit processor internally, has 16-bit addressing in it, but it is strangled by an 8-bit data bus. Same processor that you're going to find in the 5150s, 5160s, and a lot of PC clones at the time. Just a little story behind that. The reason for the 8088 existing is kind of funny. So Intel had the 8086 being produced for quite a while. They had a lot of contracts for it out, and when IBM was developing the 5150, they approached Intel and said, hey, we'd like to use 8086, but we only want to pay something like $5 per processor. Well, Intel's contracts were for more for the 8086, and they really, quite frankly, could not keep up with the demand that IBM was going to want. So what they did was they made a spin-off processor a little bit cheaper. The 8088 is an economy version of the 8086, can process all the same instruction set. However, like I said, it's bottlenecked by its 8-bit data bus, and because it was a different processor, and it allowed Intel to be able to sell it at much cheaper rates to IBM without upsetting its customers for its 8086 line. So I just think it's a very interesting bit of history as to why the 8088 came into existence. That's the weight that IBM carried back then. Anyway, because of that, this computer could have up to a megabyte of accessible RAM. Now, if you compare that to other computers of the day, and this leads into the question of why would someone buy this in 1982, 83, or 84 when you had the ISA bus system out there, PC and PC clones? Well, let's compare what we have. So if you look at the processors, right, so the 8088, that's the same as a lot of your PC clones and compatibles, 8086s as well. But if you look at the other computers of the era, mostly your 8-bit computers out there, you can only address up to 64 kilobytes of RAM. Now, there was a few goofy experiments out there, like the Apple III and some others, where they would advertise more than 64K of RAM, but you had to do these funny memory bank swapping routines in order to store the extra data in RAM, but you couldn't access it all at once. So you had those strange ideas floating around at the time. And then this computer here, you can just directly address up to a meg of RAM. So these things came, is my understanding. You had a couple different versions of motherboards with this. Some of them would come with two 64K RAM chips, so give you 128 kilobytes of RAM. A lot of them came with three, giving you, I think, 192 kilobytes of RAM. And then you could also get a later version with three 256 kilobyte RAM chips, which would give you up to, I believe, 768K of RAM, if memory serves correct. Now, I don't know which one this has. I have not taken a peek at the motherboard to see what it has. We will be finding that out. I would love to find out that this is one that's got 3/4 of a meg of RAM. Of course, these computers were also expandable. Regardless of which one you got, you could expand these up. So you could theoretically drop a 256K RAM board in one of these and have a meg of RAM. Now, that's very interesting for the time period. Like I said, so this is technically, with asterisk, a 16-bit computer with that capability. In 1982 and 83, if you look even at the IBM and IBM clone group of computers, the 5150, initially they were released with as low as 16 kilobytes of RAM. A lot of them were released with, my understanding, 64 kilobytes of RAM, and I want to say they were expandable up to like 256K, okay? Then you had your PC XT 5160s released, which could go up to 640K of RAM, okay? And that was not until 1983. These computers were already being sold for 2 years by then, having well beyond that capability, 640K. So if you're looking at these things, and by the way, you know, with your hard drive access with these things, not all of them came with a hard drive, but enough did. You didn't even get hard drive capabilities offered until the XT came out in 83 with these things. So if you're a computer buyer and you've got to do, let's say, AutoCAD work or huge spreadsheets, you know, Lotus 1, 2, 3, you have huge data loads on these things, this actually would have been a preferable computer. You've got plenty of processing power, you've got plenty of RAM afforded to you, you've got excellent data storage at the time. These things could also, by the way, accept 8-inch floppy drives externally as well, and those were capable of a good bit of, I think over a megabyte of data on those. I don't own any 8-inch drives, don't know a whole lot about them, other than they were decent capacity for the era, so these things could, of course, utilize those as well. And so yeah, compared to the PC and the XT, technically this thing was in a heavier weight class. Now, its drawback, of course, was that Zenith and the Z-100 family of computers that were out there just could not add up enough weight to go against the 800-pound gorilla that was IBM. In fact, IBM was so influential when they released the ISA bus system that by the time they released the PS2 with a new bus system on it, IBM could not even override its own ISA bus, and of course then the extended ISA bus system and the PS2 and its new bus system utterly died. It failed as a product. Although, however interesting it was. So anyway, if you look back at the era that this came in, I could see why a person would spend the money on this, and it wasn't cheap. I could see why someone would spend the money on one of these computers versus any of the 8-bit 64K computers that were available. That includes the Apple IIs as well. It was by this point the Macintosh was not released yet, and the Lisa really didn't go anywhere. Let's be honest. I would love to have a Lisa in my collection. Didn't really go anywhere. The Apple III, it has its issues. Again, I would love to have one, but it has its issues. This right here would have been a very feasible computer to own. There were some deficiencies here, in my opinion. You didn't have the full ASCII character code that IBM PCs later became very standard. This thing is missing a good chunk of them, of the characters, so programmers would have had to know what they're working for and designing for in order to know their character sets to use. So, but yeah, with 640 by 500 graphics capability, you would have had a phenomenal resolution available to you out of the box in the very early 80s when, frankly, IBM PC and PC compatibles just weren't able to produce that. Certainly not without some very expensive aftermarket cards that began coming out later on. So this would have been extremely useful for design work, AutoCAD, and so on and so forth. Let's talk about operating systems and software for these computers. So initially, back in the late 70s and very early 80s, Gary Kildall's digital research was the go-to for operating systems, especially for S100 bus systems. So CP/M would have been one of the primary choices on these computers here. And shortly after that, Microsoft stepped into the scene and developed PC-DOS, of course, in conjunction with IBM. And they, interestingly enough, they did get with Zenith here, and they produced an OEM version called Z-DOS, ultimately, that would run on these computers and give a decent amount of MS-DOS capability on these computers. So long as the software didn't have IBM, like CGA graphics calls, those were not going to work. But a lot of programs that didn't make those kind of function calls would run fine on these computers. So yes, you have some DOS capability and of course CP/M on these machines. Speaking of Microsoft, they actually did release an OEM version of Microsoft Windows 1 that would run on these computers. Now that's a very interesting thing to talk about. Microsoft Windows 1 really didn't accomplish a whole lot. It's a novelty to toy with, but it really, I wouldn't say it had very many big killer apps. It didn't really take off until, of course, Windows 3, 3.1 especially. But nevertheless, I've got a copy of Windows 1 for the Zenith OEM package here. I would like to try it out in here. Now, the big question is, how do you run it feasibly without a mouse? That's something we're going to play around with. This thing does come with 2 serial ports and a parallel port, so we're going to try and see if we can get maybe a mouse working on one of these serial ports. I have no idea if we're going to be successful at that or not. We're going to try, however, assuming we can get this computer cleaned up and powered on and so on. So that is some interesting software there for this. So who would have used a computer like this on top of that? Interestingly enough, one of the biggest buyers of these computers was the U.S. government. I know a lot of people read and spoken to have talked about this being very common in the U.S. Navy and a few other government departments. And it may be one of the reasons why these computers are so rare now. We all know how the United States government works. One of the most inefficient groups of people on the entire planet. They would have just thrown most of these things away once they were done with them around the late 80s to early 90s, is my understanding, when they started phasing them out. But they did, from my understanding, buy a lot of these, had some very big contracts with Zenith, and got great use there. Probably not as many in the domestic home PC world, as again, they were rather expensive computers. But yes, these things did see a lot of government work. This one here in particular, as my understanding, was not a U.S. government computer. This one was purchased for home use. So that is who would have used these computers. I would think a few businesses as well would have had them, but they are these days rather rare. Okay, so let's talk about expansion. So this computer comes with 5 extra S100 bus slots, 2 of which in mine are taken up by the floppy disk controller and the MFM hard drive controller, but leaves you with 3 slots. And most, from what I understand, S100 cards from the mid-70s to the mid-80s will work in this machine, although there are some that will be, useless. I mean, why would you go put a 16 kilobyte RAM card in something like this that could take much bigger ones. Being that this computer was not fully PC compatible, there were some very interesting creative cards that were produced back in the early 80s for this computer. One in particular is very interesting to me, is a Lomas Color Magic board, which I am aware that a few members of the vintage computer group community are looking into reproducing, as they're apparently exceptionally rare, maybe only one or two functional ones in existence that we're aware of. There is also the Gemini PC compatibility board that my understanding is you would pull the internals of the computer out and put it down on top of the main motherboard in order to make it mostly PC compatible. And then there's also another one called Easy PC board. Most of what I understand, most of these boards would bring a computer up, one of these up to 90 to 95% compatibility with an IBM PC compatible computer. And then one or two of them out there, like the Lomas Color board, could even go so far as to successfully run Microsoft Flight Simulator, which was for a very long time considered the gold standard of pushing a computer to its limits and testing everything out. I would love to get my hands on any one of these kinds of PC compatibility boards. Assuming I can get this running, it would be a fantastic addition here to round out this computer and at least keep it for what it is, but bring it into that PC compatibility realm so that it can run, a little bit better stuff on a computer that has, frankly, excellent specs to it. So yes, it had great compatibility, provided that you had those boards, and then accepted, I think there was even some very interesting adaptable boards back then where you would have, for a brief period of time, S-100 to ISA adapter boards in here. I have not read a whole lot about them. I would like to know more, but obviously this would have been for a very brief window, fleeting bit of time back then. I am also aware that the Z-100 / S-100 community has been, over the last 10 to 15 years, involved with releasing some basically community-built updates. Like I know there's an IDE controller floating around out there to be able to put IDE drives on these things, which is fantastic news to get you past, at this point, MFM drives are 4 decades old. There's very few left. The ones that are out there, who knows how much longer they'll run. So going into the IDE world is a great thing to be able to do. Along with, I know they've got some other PC compatibility BIOS updates and so on that has apparently been put out there. I would love to investigate these things more once I get this thing running, if my skills are up to the challenge enough to get this computer running. So that's a very interesting topic, getting this thing closer to being able to run PC software. All right, so resources for the Zenith Z-100 family of computers. There are a handful on the internet, as I said before. One of them is, just go Google Z100 Lifeline, fantastic website. There's also s100computers.com. I'm going to link a bunch of stuff in the description to help you. There's plenty of disk images on archive.org, as well as a few other places where you can get Zenith OEM specific software and operating systems for these computers. Like I said, there are precious few people preserving this family of computers out there. I want to be one of the people involved with preserving these things now that I am the owner of one of these things. I think all vintage computing deserves a place of preservation, but I believe this is a very unique, interesting, what I would say is probably approaching the pinnacle of S100 computing back in the early 80s. So there's my presentation on the information, compiled research of these computers. Hopefully this information has helped you if you are searching for information about these computers. And stick around as we go into our next few videos talking about the hardware, the cleanup, the testing, and then ultimately, if we can get this thing running safely, looking into the operating systems and the software that these things were capable of Once again, thank you for coming to the Southern Vintage Computing channel today. I appreciate having you. Have a great day.